So I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sean Young. I am the co-champion. My other co-champion is Chief Allison. He's currently sick today, so he couldn't be here. Maybe he does pass on his regards. So co-champion of the Defense Women's Advisory Organization. So here at 14 Wing. Thank you very much all for coming. It is my esteemed pleasure to actually introduce our guest speaker today. Our guest speaker is Dr. Claudine Bonner. Dr. Bonner holds a Honors of Bachelor of Science and Masters of Education from Toronto, Masters of Arts from Dalhousie, and a PhD in Gender Equity and Social Justice from Western. She has led research projects on diversity and equity in education, African Caribbean migration to Cape Breton, and Canada's 19th century Black press. She currently serves on the board of the Council of the Canadian Historical Association, Valley African Nova Scotia Development Association, and the Nova Scotia Women's History Society. Dr. Claudine Bonner, Vice Provost of EDI Bonner and Associate Professor of Sociology and Women Gender Studies, was appointed to the new role in September. She brings a wealth of experience teaching and researching gender, equity, and social justice, focusing on African diaspora, migration, and identity issues. Before taking on the role, she helped identify gaps and develop recommendations as a member of the President's Anti-Racism Task Force and the President's Advisory Council on Decolonization. Please welcome with me, Dr. Bonner.
I'd like to start, actually, before I get started, I'd like to thank my hosts here at 14th Wing for inviting me. And I'd like to point out that I was supposed to have been here last year to do this talk, and there was a horrendous snowstorm or ice storm or whatever, winter does in Nova Scotia. And so I couldn't make it. Then we thought I could do it remotely, and nobody could hear me. So I wasn't supposed to be here last year. So here we are. I said yes right away when I was invited to come. And I said yes because I think it's important that we celebrate this day, this month, every year. And it's an opportunity to celebrate the achievements of women and girls and women-identifying folk here and throughout the globe. And it's important to recognize that while we celebrate these achievements, we can't lose sight of how precarious and how hard-won the achievements of women are. And it's one of those things that we take for granted much too often. The reality of our world is, according to the United Nations, women make up half of the world. We know this, we say this all the time. It's one of those things we take for granted, but actually the statistics bear that out. But yet, we do 2/3 of the hours of work on the planet, but we make 1/10 of the earnings. So when you think about that, and women also own less than 1% of the property on the planet. So many people still question the need to celebrate International Women's Day. Many people still question this whole fight for equity. I'm going to be fighting with this thing all morning. Question the fight for equity. But the reality is, even if we got an improvement of 10%, we wouldn't be near halfway. Right? So we celebrate our achievements, we celebrate our wins. There are lots of places where women are doing amazingly. I am a university educator, and in the university sector in North America, women outnumber men. There are more female, people enrolled, not necessarily graduating, than there are male-identifying folk. So the reality is, in certain spaces, women are doing wonderfully. But we all know the places where we're not. And so I think it's imperative that we keep reminding ourselves that we can't sleep on our successes, that we can celebrate our achievements, but at the same time remember to stay in the fight. So that is kind of, see, one of my biggest problems in life is I go off script a lot. My students know this very well. So I decided to script my talk this morning. I haven't said anything that's on this paper yet. So you'll forgive me, I will try, because I am cognizant of there being schedules, and I appreciate you being here, and I don't want to keep you beyond the time you're supposed to be. It was my understanding that I was supposed to talk for around 45 minutes, and in reality, if I stick to my script, I will not be here that long. So, what I wanted to talk to you about today is this notion of imposter syndrome, and also this notion of change-making in society, change-making in general. And so in this talk, I plan to tell you a little bit about my own story, as well as the stories of a few others. Because this year's theme for International Women's Day in Canada is Strength in Every Story. So, here we go.
Here we go. It hates me. Okay.
So a few weeks ago, I got a WhatsApp message from my friend Julie. And in this message, she said, I have a demand for you. Check out this forum and give me some of the content, and I will nominate you. Now, if any of you have taken any IT security courses or anything, if you have any basic knowledge of what we do and don't do when we get emails, you know that an email starting with, I have a demand for you, is definitely a suspect email. And maybe you should delete it and not click on any links or fill out any forms or whatever. So I didn't. What I did was I messaged Julie and I said, what the heck? And a part of me thought it was legit, and maybe it's a joke, because for those of you who follow comedy, you might recognize Julie. She's a Canadian comedian, and she plays tricks on me all the time. So I figured, what the heck? But it turned out that she was really actually trying to nominate me as a current day Black changemaker in Atlantic Canada. And she needed specific examples to complete the nomination for it. So when she told me this, I thought, okay, but I don't know if I fit the description of this changemaker thing. I looked, I did my usual Google search to see who had won before and all that, and I wasn't like a lot of the people who they had listed. So I said, I'm just an academic. I just do school stuff, right? I research Canadian history. So I don't know if I'm the person you're looking for. But I have the best friends in the world. So she ignored me and went on and just did the nomination on her own. But when I got the call last year to do this talk, I had the same reaction. Why would you call me? Like, what could I talk to a room full of folks about relative to International Women's Day when I'm just an academic and I kind of just do school stuff, right? I research Canadian history. How interesting is that? And it made me think about what I wanted to talk about. I thought, what could I possibly talk to you about when all I know about the military is what I've seen in the movies or on TV. And I've had a few encounters with a few military types at CrossFit. But really, I don't know what happens here, right? I have no idea what you people do. Would you be interested in hearing me talk about Canadian labor migration, or Caribbean migration to Cape Breton, or steelmakers in Cape Breton? Because that's what I do, right? Like I keep telling you, I talk about school stuff. But nowhere in my rationalization or thinking through the decision to do this talk did I actually stop and think, I happen to be a specialist in Canadian migration history. I happen to be, as you know, the lieutenant kindly noted just now, a specialist in issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Why? Because I'm not good at selling myself, right? Every year in my career development meetings, my supervisors have said the following: Claudine, I know you've done way more than you're telling me. You need to do a better job of selling yourself. So my immediate reaction to Julie and my immediate reaction to Marie when she emailed me to invite me to this morning's event was a classic case of imposter syndrome. I didn't think I was good enough to do the things that I do every day. And I know there are people in the room who are very lucky in that they have no idea what I'm talking about. Imposter syndrome, what the heck. But it actually is a psychological occurrence that exists and has been documented widely. And it happens when people doubt their skills, they doubt their talents or their accomplishments. And they have this persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. So despite them having extreme and extensive evidence of being ridiculously competent in most cases, they don't believe they deserve their successes, they don't believe they deserve their luck, they don't deserve whatever benefits have come their way in their positions. And people used to think that this was something that was only experienced by high-achieving women. But over the years, researchers have come to realize that it affects both men and women relatively equally. And some psychologists actually think that imposter syndrome is something that can apply to anyone who isn't able to internalize their own successes. Okay. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I really remember, the first memory I have of experiencing this feeling of being an imposter was in my first week of university. I was 18, and instead of being, you know, excited at being at the school of my choice, excited to start this new journey and do all this stuff that I wanted to do my whole life, I spent the first few weeks of school convinced that they would tell me that they'd made a mistake and that I had to go back to high school. Before that, I'd always been a pretty precocious child. And embarrassingly, although it was a lifetime ago, my mother will still tell anybody who will listen about how once when I was 4 or 5 years old, I disappeared on a train trip and nobody could find me. And then they found me in the dining car telling this crowd of grown-ups stories about all the trips I'd been on and all of these things about my life. So that really sums up child Claudine. I had figured out that grown-ups thought I was smart. So whenever I got an opportunity, I would be talking to grown-ups. I never had kid friends. I was one of those kids who was always seeking out grown-ups because they validated me. They made me feel special. I started reading early. My parents gave me whatever books I wanted. There were no boundaries on what I would read. I'd read my parents' textbooks. I'd read, you know, whatever was there. And when I was 7, my mom packed us up and we moved to Jamaica. And she started teaching at the dental school in Kingston. And in the British system, or at least the schools I went to in Jamaica, they rank you in school. So through elementary school, through high school, we were ranked. And so I was always being ranked first or second or third of the third year 35 kids in my class. And I actually remember it, and all my friends hate it because I tell the story at least once a year. I remember the day I got my report card, and I wasn't first, second, or third. And I had been beaten by some of the girls who I had battled it out with over the years, but I'd also been beaten by Robert McGregor. And I've never seen this guy since high school, but I still hate him. And it's kind of weird because I was crushed. I had no idea what to do with myself. At this point, I was maybe 13 or 14 years old. And if you're an education specialist or if you're a parent, you might recognize that around 13 or 14, girls start kind of floundering in school. or they seem a little bit uncomfortable with being seen as being smart. And there are lots of theories as to what happens here in terms of their development, but what I remember is realizing that I'd been beaten by Robert McGregor. And what did it mean in terms of who I was? Who would I be if I wasn't the smart kid? Whatever the explanation, the precocious self-assuredness started to disappear, and the self-doubt started to creep in. I came back to Canada in time to finish high school, but the doubts continued to plague me. Somehow, nobody noticed. And I finished my bachelor's degree with no perceived difficulty. But over the 4 years, I started noticing something about myself. I noticed that while I'm a pretty confident person on the surface, I rarely back down from challenges, but there's a little voice inside my head that's never gone away. And I know that I'm not alone in this experience. According to a Time magazine article, about 1/3 of young people suffer from imposter syndrome, and 70% of everyone else is likely to experience it at some point in their lives. Some of the most successful and well-known people we know or know about speak of having the same experience, from Michelle Obama to Jacinda Ardern to Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, or to writer Neil Diamond. They all have questioned their right to enter spaces where there are others who are so much more worthy than they are, who could have been invited to that place instead of them. So, in a study of about 150 successful women, researchers noted that despite their earned degrees, the scholastic honors they had, the high achievement they had on standardized tests, praise and professional recognition from colleagues and respected authorities, these women did not experience an internal sense of success. They considered themselves to be imposters. They found innumerable means of negating any external evidence that contradicted their personal belief that they were, in reality, unintelligent. One woman professor said, "I'm not good enough to be on the faculty here. I think some mistake was made on the selection process." Another woman, the chair of her department, said, "Obviously I'm in this position because my abilities have been overestimated." Another woman with 2 master's degrees, a PhD, and numerous publications to her credit, considered herself unqualified to teach remedial college classes in her field. Now, I think it's important to note that most of these people were aware of their competence in their jobs. It was just anything extraneous to the thing they specialized in. And even if you're skeptical that this is a real thing, I think you can think about moments where you couldn't figure out what was happening with a person in front of you who had all the credentials and training, but they kept coming up with questions or concerns that maybe I'm not the person who wanted this role. And what the researchers in this study came away from the study realizing was that the imposters seemed to typically fall into one of 2 groups in terms of their family history. Now, this is like armchair psychology on my part, but I thought it was interesting to share with you, because when I read this study, I thought, oh, I could see people who I know and have known fitting into some of these categories. But I think it's important to also recognize that it doesn't have to be the family. It can be your friend group or whatever group of people in your childhood whose validation was important to you during your socialization. Right? And so in one of the 2 groups, many of the women had had a sibling or a close relative who had always been labeled the smart one, while they were seen as the social one or the sensitive one of the family. For them, they had to prove that they were as bright as this sibling, regardless of what they'd accomplished intellectually. And deep down, what they ended up feeling was they found themselves believing the family myth, the myth that they were not the smart one, even though a part of them wanted to disprove it. So at school, they had an opportunity to prove to their family and to themselves that they were just as bright. And they intended to be successful. They succeeded at getting outstanding grades, academic honors, attention from teachers. But whatever validation they got from the family was never enough for them. They were constantly chasing it, constantly doubting their competence and seeking the validation. because this was the start of their own imposter syndrome. So then there's the other group. In the second group, there's a different kind of dynamic at play. In that group, family would tell the young woman that she was superior in every way, in her intellect, in her personality, in her appearance, and her talents. They told her that there was nothing she couldn't do if she wanted to, and whatever she wanted, she could do easily. The women in that group share stories of how they demonstrated their precociousness as infants, as toddlers, as small children. They learned to talk and read very early, and so on. Does this sound familiar? In the family's eyes, this young woman was perfect. The child never really bought in, because she learned soon enough that she couldn't do anything and everything she wanted, but she felt obligated to fulfill the expectations of her family, even though she knew she couldn't keep the act up forever. Because she was always indiscriminately praised for everything she did, she began to distrust her parents' perceptions of her, and more importantly, she began to doubt herself. Having internalized the belief that brightness equals perfection with ease, once she acknowledged that her successes came from hard work and other things, she jumped to the conclusion that if she's not a genius, she must be an imposter. So there have been a ton of stories and studies and explanations for the persistence of this phenomenon. And since this is just one example from one study, please, I beg of you, don't run home and tell your mom that you have imposter syndrome because she always told you you were the smartest flower in the room. I just used this example because I wanted to highlight the connections that have been found between imposter syndrome and social expectations. It's no coincidence that society often doesn't define women as competent beings. And at the same time, these smart, competent women are convinced that their competence can't be real. So there's this cognitive dissonance, right? We're hearing that we can't be smart and competent. And we are smart and competent. But we don't feel that we are, because the messages we get tell us otherwise. And we know all too well that when a woman does well, it's more often seen as a fluke than as a result of her ability. We still live in a society that devotes far too much time to stories of these one-off successes, where we talk about women who accomplish greatness as doing it despite the odds, as opposed to because of their ability. Women are told not to talk about their intelligence because nobody likes us copycats. So what's the answer? There are many advice columns that provide you with ways to understand and deal with imposter syndrome. But for those of you in leadership positions, it is vital that you recognize the internal struggles that some of your best and brightest encounter on a daily basis. Recognize that voice that's perhaps telling them that despite all the evidence to the contrary, they're not good enough or smart enough to complete the task at hand. And help them, or help yourself, to hear the imposter syndrome in their heads and remind them why it is a false voice. You might have to do it for yourself, because as a leader, you might be just like the women in the study that I described. Someone who is a respected professional in your field and who others look to for direction, but deep down, you're waiting to be called out. This is where this year's theme kind of comes in or begins to come into this talk. Knowing some of the whys behind the negative self-talk and the self-sabotage on the part of some of the highest achievers, it's your job to inspire them to greatness, especially when we are well aware that society still expects little in the way of competence from them. Remind them that they're not alone. And maybe share this anecdote with them that I've taken from Neil Gaiman's blog. And for those of you who might not know, Neil Gaiman is the famous British writer that I mentioned before that I had imposter syndrome. Even though I can't for the life of me figure out why, when he's won pretty much all the writing awards there are to win. But as I said before, success doesn't save you, right? So there's Gaiman. So he wrote in his blog, "Some years ago, I was lucky enough to be invited to a gathering of great and good people, artists and scientists, writers and discoverers of things. And I felt that at any moment they would realize that I didn't qualify to be there, among these people who had done really great things. On my second or third night there, I was standing at the back of the hall while a musical entertainment happened, and I started talking to a very nice, polite, elderly gentleman about several things, including our shared first name, Neil. And then he pointed to the hall of people and said words to the effect of, I just look at all these people and I think, what the heck am I doing here? They've made amazing things, and I just went where I was sent. And I said, yes, but you were the first man on the moon. And I think that counts for something. And I felt better, because if Neil Armstrong felt like an imposter, maybe everyone did. Maybe there weren't any grown-ups, only people who had worked hard and also got lucky and were slightly out of their depth. All of us doing the best job we could, which is all we can really ever hope for. So, I really wanted to share that with you, but I also wanted to lean a little more into the theme of this year's International Women's Day to talk about more than just successful women who may experience imposter syndrome. Because as an educator, the notion of inspiring action and getting people to make changes in their communities involves providing students with the tools to dismantle the structures that they inherit and replace them with newer and hopefully better structures. It involves getting them to recognize and getting past their own imposter moments as well. And I often ask my students what it means to be a critical thinker and why critical thinking is important. And when I do this, my goal is for them to recognize and acknowledge that the goal of thinking critically about our world isn't to be a naysayer or a downer, as some people might say, but rather to find ways to make transformative change. In a world where there's so much information at our fingertips, the job of teaching is rapidly changing. It isn't so much anymore about teaching material, it's more about teaching how to find information and how to ask the right questions. So in other words, it's about how to be better learners. So by becoming better learners, they have the opportunity to become innovators and creators. Social innovation is all about creating and implementing new ideas that can address social, economic, and environmental challenges. It involves finding creative solutions to complex problems, improving the lives of people, and making a positive impact on society. Young people have a critical job to play as change makers in the development of society and in all of our futures. Change makers are those individuals who are motivated to take action and to promote positive change in their communities and the wider world. They promote progress, they seek out solutions to pressing challenges, and strive to make a lasting difference. And we know the names of many of the young women in our world who are working to broaden inclusive spaces and to change our world in big ways. Young women like the two I have here, Greta Thunberg and Malala Yousafzai, who have already served as inspirations for the young women behind them and for the rest of us. But, so in the spirit of celebrating women and their stories, today I want to explore the theme of strength in every story by talking about the work of change makers, like, I don't want to talk about me anymore, talk about the work of change makers I've seen from, or change making that I've seen from 4 incredible young women I've had the pleasure of teaching and mentoring. Each of these women understand that change making doesn't have to be a grand project, but rather it entails making change right where they are. For each one, they've taken their understanding of equity and inclusion and created programming or spearheaded initiatives for addressing needs that they found in their communities, whether big or small. And I go to this because one of my absolute heroes in life is Angela Davis. And she received an honorary degree from Dalhousie about, time means nothing since COVID, some years ago, not too long ago. And there was a Q&A after she received her honorary degree. And one of the things a young woman asked was, how do I make change in the world when the people I hear about are people like Gandhi and MLK and, you know, these people who you recognize when their faces go up on a screen. I feel like it's so hard, it's such a high mountain to climb when I'm just here. And for me, the response to that question is something that drives how I live my life every day. Angela Davis said, "Why are you trying to climb that mountain? Live your life every day so that when you leave this planet, the people immediately around you can say, 'She changed right here.'" That's all you need to do. Because changing your immediate context is going to have a ripple effect. And maybe that ripple effect is going to make you a God-deer and MLK. Or maybe it makes you the God-deer MLK at your school. But whatever it is, you've changed the world for the better from where you are. And so I thought about some of the young people that I have taught over the last 15 years, and thought I wanted to share some of their stories with you. And you can see how some of them are making change right in their very small spaces, and some of them are making global changes. But they all started in this little place called Nova Scotia. So the first person I wanted to think about and talk about is someone some of you might recognize. Silvana Bitar is a learning support teacher who has worked at the Landmark East School in Wolfville and is presently at West Kings Regional as a teacher there. She's also a nutritional coach and a CrossFitter who has worked at Apple Valley CrossFit, where some of you might have crossed paths with her. She embodies for me the concept of a change maker. And I'm not alone in believing this, as she has already been nominated as a Mentor of Excellence for an Annapolis Valley Woman of Excellence Award, highlighting the ways in which she has had a notable impact on those that she has supported. I taught Silvana in my first year at Acadia, and I wanted to talk about her today because I'm so proud of all she's done in the time since she's left university. I'm also proud of a project that she worked on last year to bring local high school Special Olympians together for what was the first West Kings March Madness basketball tournament, with 7 schools participating in the inaugural year. And of course, this tournament is about to happen again, and it's the 2nd year. And please go out and support them. I think it is just an awesome thing that she's doing right in her community to make her community better. My second change maker is Joy Cheapway. And for those of you who are exercise physiologists or kin people, you might know Joy as well. She's a pretty well-known face throughout Nova Scotia. She's a clinical exercise physiologist and works as the GM of health management at the YMCA in Halifax. As a kin student at Acadia, Joy talked about the need for more community resources and to improve awareness of using exercise as a form of medicine to positively impact quality of life. So what she's done to address health inequalities and improve representation is she founded the Black Wellness Cooperative, which is a not-for-profit organization of Black healthcare professionals who share their knowledge and expertise in Nova Scotia. And for one of their projects, they forged relationships with a group of elders in Hammond's Plains, and they lead group classes and activities with seniors in this kind of approach to active aging. They also regularly run events aimed at lessening perceived barriers and limitations to exercise within the Black community, especially targeting and assisting those who may not have access to learning and programming. And so Joy is yet another one of my former students who I just think is doing such amazing things in her community. The next one is Kiara Sexton, and she's the most recent graduate from Acadia that I'd like to talk about. While she was a student, Kiara was active on campus as an advocate for more supports and education around mental illness, and in terms of other social issues about which she had concerns, things such as poverty, systemic racism, and other forms of marginality. She received the Democratic Student Citizenship Award when she graduated, and is now doing exactly what she always told us she would do when she finished university. She went back to her Spryfield community, where she works as a student support worker for Pathways to Education, because she believes in the need to challenge systemic issues of race and poverty that prevent many youth from being able to attend university. And the final person I wanted to feature is Habiba Cooper Diallo. And Habiba I never actually taught, but I've known her since she was about 13, because her mother was one of my mentors. And I've had the pleasure of being one of Habiba's many mentors for several years. And her story is kind of the perfect example of seeing a problem in the world far beyond where she lived and trying to figure out what she can do. Since she was 12, she's been one of a few fistula advocates globally, working for the eradication of obstetric fistula. And it's, if you haven't heard of it, obstetric fistula is essentially the outcome of an obstructed labor, where basically after labor, the person who experiences fistula can experience permanent incontinence, and as a result of that, social stigma. Like a lot of the young women who experience fistula tend to be shunned by their families, put out of their homes, and so there is a need, it's a medical issue, but also a larger social issue. And it happens mostly to young women who are poor, living in low-resource countries. So in 2012, while she was in high school, she founded the Women's Health Organization International. I was on the board when I got fired. It's a not-for-profit organization, non-performance American. It was a not-for-profit organization geared at fighting fistula. Her unwavering passion for the empowerment of women and girls has received recognition twice from the federal government of Canada, and Habiba has managed to gain her organization membership in the UN campaign to end fistula. So she's been doing like insurmountably big things since she was like 13 years old. She's also developed partnerships with stakeholders in West Africa, from civil society groups, government, district hospitals, and surgeons specializing in obstetric fistula. And she also published a book, I think when she was 13, on obstetric fistula. She also published a second book at the end of high school. You might have come across it. It's called Black in School, or hashtag Black in School. And it was published from her journal as a high school student in Halifax. In fact, that book was made into a documentary which just screened at the Halifax Black Film Festival last weekend. So it's just, she's just an incredible young woman. I sometimes look at all of these young women and wonder, when do they sleep? Right? Because they're so incredible. But this is why I do what I do. It gives me such joy and such pride to see my students and mentees go out into the world and flourish. The inspiring work they're beginning to do in their communities serves as examples of citizenship and empowerment. And by being part of the solution, these young women help to bridge divides, challenge systemic injustices, and empower marginalized communities. They play a critical role in increasing levels of equity and promoting policies that support underserved populations. So not only do they as change makers support progress and development within their communities, they can also serve as powerful models for change for those around them. By setting examples of socially and environmentally responsible behavior, these and other change makers help to create a positive ripple effect that encourages others to take action and to join in the efforts. So, I started this talk by speaking a little bit tongue-in-cheek about my imposter syndrome and all the reasons why a part of me believes that I shouldn't be here. I've spent the better part of the last 25 years working as a university administrator, returning to school to add to my own credentials, and since then, as an educator. I've written numerous journal articles and book chapters. I have a new book coming out in a few weeks. I have earned many numerous scholastic honors, including being named a Fulbright Scholar, becoming the inaugural Vice Provost of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Acadia, and recently being named a Canada Research Chair at Mount Allison. I've traveled extensively and lived in a number of other countries, all of which have shaped the person I am today. But the truth is, even when I can't remember my own accolades, and I do poorly, as I told you, at selling myself, I recognize that I have dozens of young people who I have helped walk through the doors of the Academy and helped to envision more for themselves and for others like them. Serving as a mentor has given me profound inspiration, allowing me to support others on their journey to success, while simultaneously learning from them and their unique perspectives. For me, that is what it means to inspire inclusion. Hopefully, I and they have managed to inspire you, and I'm sure there are tons of you in this room who have the most inspiring stories that one could imagine, beginning with, for those who are in service, choosing to be in service. And I think it's important that you remember to challenge the voice inside you that tells you that you're not good enough. Or maybe to champion someone else you see who's in need of a reminder to believe in themselves. Or maybe you've been inspired to acknowledge that true activism lies in the daily work, the things you do in your community and beyond to create more inclusion. And for me, this is what March 8th is all about. So, thank you again for inviting me to share this International Women's Day with you, and to share what is really a multi-generational collection of actions to build a better world. I hope that you will leave here feeling somewhat inspired, somewhat amused. And I promise you that I'll send you a little note to tell you what happened about the whole nomination